say, prosperity or posterity?
No, prosperity. Prosperity.
In the back.
Okay, maybe I'm gonna be skeptical too, but that seems to be welcomed. Okay, so when you say human prosperity, right, I'm gonna get into kind of a rant here, but, you know, all the way back to what third wave feminism, whose voice, right? Now in this world of like smartphones, et cetera, and so forth, what was it, the figure quote, 40% of the world has access to internet? And as a gentleman, I believe last semester spoke, there are places in India, I think it was, that the main way people communicate with each other is through the community radio, for example, right? Now, if we look at this in a broader media ecological perspective, something on the radio will eventually make it to somewhere in the world where someone has internet. It eventually makes its way on the internet. We all hear about everything. The cool thing about everyone having a voice via some media channel is then everyone can participate, and in that way people can, you know, start a fight with the neighbor next door and find the people they like, thus the village idea, as we have been discussed, right? So, I guess what I'm kind of getting at here is your original question about the idea of like the difference of biodiversity versus diversity of opinion in a way. Now, of course, McLuhan had suggested that print homogenizes and, well, I heard other way around, excuse me. So the print brings about the individual. The individual has his own opinion. In the modern age, in the so-called acoustic space that we inhabit, not everyone's an individual anymore per se, but are we not? Because we're still coming out of the biases of print culture. Therefore, I think to a certain degree, we're using these newfound technologies to find our allegiances, to create our, you know, little niches within the global village. And in a sense, this is what causes the conflicts, and this is not to devalue anyone else's, you know, value judgments upon the issues at hand. These are all very important issues. But I think what the root of the problem is exactly what you were talking about, is exactly the diversity of opinion and then the stands people take, and then we get into the notions of hierarchy to a certain degree. So if anyone who's much smarter than me wants to take on the notion of hierarchy, by all means. But that's kind of like just like where I'm at with this conversation so far. It seems to, I guess the short answer is I believe these modern technologies are giving us all a voice, and we're all learning to speak either to or against each other, I think. And it's leading us to warfare over things like fossil fuels and, you know, religion. All the big issues today that are all driving us apart, yet somehow unifying us in other weird ways. So I guess that's kind of where I'm at with all of this.
Bonnie or Rohinton or Nora, or Bob.
Culture is an organism. It propagates itself, just like any living organism. And we have the culture of consumption, we have the culture of burning fossil fuels, and we have to find some few voices in the wilderness have to find a way to communicate that we're moving towards a disaster. And that's why I became a fan of the Pope, because he talks about things like values. AI isn't worth a tinker's damn because there's no values in it. You said garbage in, garbage out. Well, it's no values in, no values out. So AI can never solve anything. We have to start examining what our values are. And as a culture, we're not really organized to look at our values. We're all scientists, we're all value free. And that's the problem. We have to start examining our values. So when the Pope came out with his encyclical Laudato Si, I read, hey, here's a guy that's really grabbing hold of the, you know, the real issue. Here's a Pope that's acting like a Christian. He's worried about people that are poor. He's worried about Sister Earth and how we're destroying her. So I think that that's the real issue. And so I've organized this dialogue of scientists and theologians. Come along.
When is it again?
I'm glad you asked that. Talk to me afterwards if you want more details.
Well, I'm not too sure that we are value free. I think it's more that we are value blind. And I think maybe what media literacy does is it tries to uncover and make visible those values so that people can reassess and reflect on their values, and then they can consciously make changes.
Our value is consumption.
I would just like to say that the book I'm finishing up is actually on value theory. So one value theorist anyway. It's from here to Trek. The social and psychological changes needed for a Star Trek future is the subheads on the movie. But yeah, and, I think that a lot of people just wander through their lives without questioning anything. And we talked momentarily about AI. I joke, sort of, about writing an algorithm that would teach AI not to wipe us all out, because God knows that eventually it's going to figure out that we're a virus. And how to selectively pick people to actually, who needs to go to actually change how the rest behave. That's sort of a joke. Then there are moments I think I should actually write it.
Yes.
Again, in response to the previous comment, I would ask, do you really think that there hasn't been any, let's say, for example, minimally in the European philosophical tradition, that there hasn't been any really serious discussion or consideration or thinking about values long, ages before all this technology? Would you really mean to suggest that we need this technology to enable us to deal with these issues? Anyway, I'm sorry, it's just my take on it.
AI is also not there yet anyway. It's not going to solve the problem.
I don't think so.
Well, a philosopher named Marshall McLuhan said we're blind to the ground in which our figures operate. And so we all know about the figures, but we don't know about the ground. And we're blind to the ground. Thank you, Marshall.
We also had a moment of Tetras earlier too, when Wilkinson mentioned that we expected cinema to be obsolete by television and DVDs, and I was just thinking, like, that's the standard Tetrad, right? What does it obsolete, but what does it also enhance? What does it amplify? What does it make forward? So more McLuhan.
Anyone who hasn't spoken yet? Yes.
I think just to take off on the discussion around AI, I mean, one of the challenges in robotics and AI is that it's forcing us to, in some sense, codify and agree on what our values and our ethics are. But I would agree that this isn't the first time that's probably happened, and perhaps in the respective technological fields of photography, which wants the technology as well as, is the study and the calculation in economics, that perhaps you're codifying in some way there as well. And so there are probably similar discussions that happened, I think, that we can learn from as we embark on this real future.
And one of the things that comes up when we talk about just codifying values is, I feel like I keep saying this is something we talked about in Spark, but it's something we talked about in Spark, is, to what extent do we want our systems to correct for human bias, right? So there's been an argument made that when Google auto-completes your searches based on what most people search for, it's reinforcing that bias in some way, right? So in that sense, it's encoding the kind of cultural bias and reinforcing it. But then the question, if you want to get away from that, is, well, whose values do you encode? Is there some sort of, is there some kind of neutral way in which Google ought to be suggesting things to you, or is there, whose values should trump in that sense? I mean, I might say, yes, there should be feminist values encoded in how Google produces its suggested autocompletes, but that's just my feedback.
When you mentioned
In the
Google
back.
Auto, I thought of those self-driving cars, which brought me back to your comment about the robots. And it's fascinating, that idea of countries worrying about cheap labor when they don't have any access to this replacement for labor, and don't have that easy pathway to a future where I used to read this comic book back in the